Welcome everybody. This is part 3 in a series that we've been doing called Guard Your Health. My name is Dr. Shmuel Shields. I'm the author of a sefer called L'Chaim, 18 Chapters to Live By. It's a Torah-based book on health. And the series is based somewhat on the book. So today we are doing something on sugar and the implications of sugar on our health. And what I'd like to do is just to begin by citing some Torah sources regarding the sweetness of Torah. So we know in the morning brachas, we pray that learning should be sweet in our mouths. In Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech teaches us that the pleasure of Torah is described as sweeter than honey from the honeycombs. And also in Sefer Tehillim, David HaMelech praises Hashem's Torah. Sweet to my palate is your word, more than honey. The Eretz Chaim explains, Proverbs cautions us against indulging in too much honey, while Torah is always satisfying. And the last quote I'd like to share with you today before we get into the topic is when a 3-year-old child starts learning Torah in Cheder for the first time, it's customary to place a little honey on the letters, so his learning is sweet from the very beginning. And we all know how sweet Torah is for the neshama. And on the flip side, on the physical side, sugar is very sweet to the body. But there are problems with sugar. And I want to sort of get into that right now and explain some of the problems with the sugar in the diet today. We actually titled the talk today, Sugared Out, What You Need to Know About Sugar. So I know there's a lot of confusion in terms of what we mean by that. So I'm going to try to explain. There are different types of sugars and different sources in the diet. First of all, there are naturally occurring sugars that are found in many of the foods that we eat. Fruits, for example, are a source of naturally occurring sugars. Other foods have sugar as part of their makeup as well. Milk, for example, has lactose. And then there are foods that, when they break down in the body, grains and starches, they turn to sugar. And then, of course, we have a category of foods. We have what we call refined or processed sugars. There are many of those types of sugars that are added to our foods, and those are the ones that we have to be most concerned about. And I'm going to give you some of the names of those types of sugars. So when you look on your ingredient list, if you see one of these names appear, you'll know that it's a form of sugar, some sort of a processed sugar that's been taken out of one food, refined in some way, and added into another food. So anything that ends in ose, O-S-E, is a form of sugar. So we're all familiar with things like sucrose, dextrose, glucose, maltose, fructose. And then we have other sweeteners and other sugars called corn syrup, maple syrup, white sugar, brown sugar, raw sugar, turbinado sugar, invert sugar. And then, of course, there's honey and other forms of sweeteners and sugars that are part of our daily intake. And then we have a category of foods called refined or processed carbohydrates. Now, some of these actually have a lot of added sugars, and the other ones actually convert or break down in the body and turn to sugar very rapidly. And some of those foods are cakes, cookies, pastries, candy, pies, donuts, muffins, croissants, white bread, which probably has some added sugar, but it also will convert and break down into glucose very rapidly. So things like white bread, white rice, white potatoes, white pasta, these foods are on the top of what we call the glycemic index, meaning they release the sugar into the blood very rapidly. Having said that, I want to give you a little perspective on how much sugar intake we have currently in what we call the acronym SAD, S-A-D, Standard American Diet, which is SAD. And let's go back to the 1600s, when the Pilgrims first came to this country. The average person back then was consuming approximately 7 pounds of sugar a year, which is about enough to bake about 25 apple pies. Today, if we fast forward the camera, the average person today is consuming somewhere between 125 and 150 pounds of sugar annually, which is just astounding. Let me give you a little perspective of what that means. It's taking a cup like this, which is about an 8-ounce cup or so, filling it more than halfway with sugar, and consuming that amount of sugar every day to get into the range that I just mentioned. So some of you are probably wondering, so what's the problem with sugar? It's sweet, tastes good, I like it, it's all over the place. What's the problem? So I want to tell you what the problem is, but before I do that, I want to just share with you from my clinical experience as a nutritionist some of the information I get from my patients. Sometimes a patient will tell me, I always ask when I do my intake, do you add sugar to your foods? Do you have sugar in your diet? Whatever. No. They feel that if they're not taking sugar out of the sugar bowl and putting it into coffee or tea or adding it to foods, that they're not using sugar. But I want to assure you that that really is not true, because almost all the processed foods that we consume have added sugars. So for example, if you take a look at the glass of juice that you might have had for breakfast this morning, and you look at the nutritional label, and you look under nutrition facts, and you look down to serving size, an 8-ounce cup, whatever it might be, then you go down to grams of sugar, and you'll be surprised to find that there are 28 grams of sugar in that juice, even though sugar isn't added. It's the sugar that's found in the juice. Every 4 grams of sugar equals 1 teaspoon. So if we do the math quickly, 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, 28. 7 teaspoons of sugar in that 1 glass of juice. And then maybe after that, the person might have a sweetened yogurt, a flavored yogurt, a fruit-flavored yogurt. Once again, look at the label, another 28 grams or so of sugar in many of the commercial fruit-flavored yogurts. So they're up to 14 teaspoons of sugar from that one meal. And as the day progresses, and a can of regular soda finds its way into the diet, we have another 10 teaspoons of sugar in the soda, and maybe some cookies or cake or pastries or some candy along the way. And at the end of the day, who knows, 25, 30, 40 teaspoons of sugar could have just entered your body. Okay, so that's the story with amounts and some of the sources of where it comes from. Again, keep in mind when you shop in the supermarket and you pick up anything that's processed, anything in a bag, a package, a box, a jar, a container, whatever it might be, and you look at the ingredient list, you're bound to find some form of sugar added to that product, whether it's a corn sweetener or any of the number ones I've just mentioned. Sometimes it even appears more than once on the label. You might see sucrose, you might see some other form of sugar listed. So again, whether it's things like mayonnaise or ketchup or mustard or a box of cereal, or a canned item, canned vegetables, canned beans, whatever the source might be, breads, they all come along with sugar. So that's some of the sources. So let me talk a little bit about what sugar does in the body and some of the health implications of consuming the amounts of sugar that we're currently consuming, particularly in the refined form. We're not quite as concerned about the naturally occurring sugars that we find in things like fruits or vegetables, or let's say in a plain yogurt. Those natural sugars that are part of the food, when you consume that food, you're getting vitamins, you're getting minerals, you're getting the fiber, you're getting a lot of other nutritional ingredients that makes that food worth eating. Another aspect I want to just share with you is that when you use sugar in the refined processed form, let's say you eat some candy or cake or cookies, the release of sugar into the blood is very rapid and you get a spike. When you eat the apple, on the other hand, the body has to digest the apple, and because it's bound, the sugar is bound into the food item with fiber and other nutrients, it gets released. It's held in the stomach longer, so the release of sugar into the blood is much slower, which is a much better thing. What happens is when sugar is released into the blood very rapidly, you get a spike in sugar, and therefore the body has to draw on a hormone called insulin to deal with that sugar. Insulin is the key that allows the sugar to get into the cells where it's used for energy. The problem is when you get the spike, the body has to release a lot of insulin because the body treats it as an emergency. The brain says, hey, we got an emergency here. The sugar in the blood just soared. We got to get it down. It's out of the range. So the brain communicates to the pancreas to release insulin, a lot of insulin to handle the crisis. A lot of insulin gets released, and then the blood sugar is sometimes brought down to a lower level than it was before in a relatively short amount of time, and then you're craving sugar again. You give yourself another dose of sugar, it spikes up, and you can go through this throughout the day. And sometimes that will cause mood swings, anxiety, depression, the bouncing around of sugar up and down. It might affect your ability to concentrate and work and a lot of other subtle effects and so on. On the other hand, as we mentioned earlier, if you choose a whole food item and the sugar is released slowly and gently into the bloodstream without a spike, the body releases small amounts of insulin to deal with that sugar, and you'll have a more sustained level of energy for a longer period of time. Okay, so having said that, I want to share with you some of the other health implications or ramifications of having too much sugar in the body. Ushmartem mi'od lenafshosechem. We have a Torah obligation, a mitzvah, to guard our bodies well, it actually means guard our neshama. The Kappa Chaim tells us that it really means to safeguard our bodies and to protect our bodies. So having said that, let me just share with you some of the consequences of the amount of sugar that we're consuming. First of all, we know, unfortunately, lo aleinu, that heart disease, cancer, diabetes, obesity are soaring today. It is like an epidemic. It's an epidemic. And a lot of that is due to lifestyle choices, foods we consume, so on and so forth, and particularly to the amounts of sugar that we consume, because the amounts of sugar actually have a negative impact on all of those conditions and can sometimes maybe set the stage for developing a health problem or disease down the road. And I'm going to show you how that might take place. First of all, when we have that insulin spike by consuming lots of sugar, particularly refined and processed foods that contain sugar and added sugars and so on, insulin is a fat-producing hormone. It tends to cause people to gain weight. Any diabetic who finds themselves on insulin, oftentimes the first year they may put on 10, 20, 30 pounds. It's not uncommon. Also, if we have too much insulin in the blood, and that's what happens when we get that spike, it also is a hormone that produces inflammation in the body, an inflammatory response. Inflammation can also affect the blood vessels and damage the blood vessels. So we could see, either directly or indirectly, however you want to look at it, heart disease, diabetes, obesity, certain cancers are certainly dietarily linked. And sugar is kind of at the root. There are other foods and other things that are problematic, but today we're talking about sugar, but it does play a role in these types of conditions. What happens is, with diabetes, is that many people who are type 2 diabetic, their bodies produce just as much insulin as a healthy person, but the body becomes insulin resistant. It can't use its own insulin. And there is a belief that due to taxing that insulin mechanism as much as we do, with the amounts of sugars that we use and the spikes that we get, we cause that insulin to be less effective, and it doesn't work the way it should. The body has to constantly need more of it, because become more resistant. So these are some of the problems. So besides some of the problems, again, might be feelings of anxiety, mood swings we may have from these sugar spikes, blood sugar fluctuations, which can lead to mood swings, depression, anxiety, neurotransmitter disturbances, nutrient losses, particularly depletion of B vitamins. The refined sugars cause the body to lose the B vitamins. And more importantly, the displacement of nutrient-dense, healthy foods that contain important vitamins and minerals necessary to keep us healthy, for the immune system to work properly, to keep us more stress resilient. If we don't have these important vitamins and minerals because they're being squeezed out by the amounts of sugary foods that are being brought in, the central nervous system, the brain, various organs in the body, the blood vessels, are all going to be affected in some negative way by loss, deficiency of essential nutrients. So I think in a relatively short time, I've given you a little perspective on some of the problems, and I hope I've made you more aware of some of the health implications and so on. Now, just to before we conclude, I just want to give you what would be considered some better food choices. So again, the body does need glucose for energy. What gasoline is to the car, glucose is to the billions or possibly trillions of cells that are in the body that all need glucose to do the jobs they need to do. So where do we get it from? Well, the best place to get it from is from whole foods, fruits, vegetables. These are all carbohydrates that ultimately body will convert these foods into sugar. At the same time, the body will be getting the vitamins and minerals that are present in these foods, and it will also be getting the fiber that's in these whole foods that will prevent the spike, and the release of insulin will not be as dramatic or as excessive by using these kind of foods. So what are these foods? Oatmeal, brown rice, squash, we mentioned fruits and vegetables, sweet potatoes, beans, legumes, peas, whole grains like 100% whole wheat. These kinds of starches, millet, barley, a whole wheat matzah or a whole spelt matzah or quinoa, these types of what we call complex carbohydrates are much better sources of energy than the refined and processed counterpart. So I would say when you're planning your meals, if you want to have better blood sugar control, having some protein, some healthy fats in the diet, having a good fiber intake, and choosing healthier starches is the direction to start to move in. And then, of course, trying to get off as much of the refined and processed sugars that are added to foods as possible. Read your labels. Try to buy fresh and frozen instead of canned and packaged and so on. So if you use more fresh or frozen or whole foods, you'll be cutting down dramatically on your sugar intake. And ultimately, over time, that should lead, Emir Hashem, to better health, to more energy, and so on. We didn't even mention the problems with the teeth and cavities. And with all the fluoridated water, it ain't helping, because kids today, their mouths are loaded with cavities and they're all drinking water with fluoride in it. And I think it's just the amount of sugar and candy that these kids eat that are destroying their teeth. I mean, young kids today, 6, 7, 8-year-olds are already having root canals. So it's a big, big problem on a lot of levels. Anyone who's viewing this, I would hope that you could be an advocate in some way and contact your rebbes, your principals, your teachers, and tell them not to reward the kids with candy. Anything that could be done in the shul, in the homes to get the sugar out of the diet. These kids are becoming addicted to sugar. They already have, there's an obesity problem with children today. Some of the kids have high cholesterol levels. I see it in my practice. It's shocking to me to see kids that are so overweight and already have blood sugar either blood sugar or cholesterol problems at such young ages. It's like the pathway is being set for them for more serious consequences down the road at much earlier ages. So I would encourage everybody to do everything they can to try to plan healthier meals, healthier snacks. They're available. I'm available for more information. If anybody wants to contact me, 718-544-4036 is my office number. Anything I can do to help or be of assistance to you in this area, please let me know. My book is also available. You'll get a lot of information from it, a lot of rabbinic endorsements of the book, so it should be a good resource for you and your families, and it will give you an education on how to eat better and how to live healthier. Anyway, I want to thank Chazaq for letting me do these presentations. I hope people are benefiting, and we do have a few more coming up. Next week, stay tuned for Lev Tov, keeping your good heart healthy. Once again, thank you for listening, and we'll hopefully see everybody next week.